Hello, team. Thanks for tuning in to the Clemson Drone Podcast. Before we start the pod, I just want to take a quick minute to let you know about our brand new comprehensive 2-course online program. This is something we just launched in February and are super pumped about. It starts off with our 8-week UAS vocation course. In this class, you'll earn your Part 107 license, learn to fly with our simulator, create maps and models using Drone Deploy, and become a Level 1 thermographer. After that, we're excited to announce our brand new course called UAS Mission Administration. This class is designed for current pilots and UAS program leaders. Over 8 weeks, we'll cover enhanced general knowledge, advanced mission planning, and you'll create your organization's custom standard operating procedure manual using our cutting-edge AI tools. At the end of the course, you'll earn AUVSI's Level 1, 2, and 3 Trusted Operator certifications. Check it all out at clemsondrone.com. Now, back to the pod. Welcome to the Clemson Drone Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Burgett from Clemson University. Join me as I dive into the world of drone technology and explore its impact through the eyes of industry leaders. Hear how drone technology directly supports public agencies, private companies, and entrepreneurs from those leading the innovation. If you're a seasoned UAS program manager or just getting into the game, this is a place to learn from the best to help your program soar to new heights. Make sure you subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a single episode of the Clemson Drone Podcast. At Clemson Drone, the sky is not the limit, it's just the beginning. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Clemson Drone Podcast. I'm Joe Burgett with Clemson University, and today we're diving into a topic that's front and center for a lot of commercial drone users. What happens if DJI and Autel drones are no longer available? Between the Defense Reauthorization Act passed in December and the new tariffs now being imposed, there is a ton of uncertainty in the UAS industry. We still don't know exactly what a ban will look like, but I think we can all agree that it's a good idea to at least start a conversation about what alternative hardware is available. To help us do that, I've invited someone who's right in the middle of it all. Sean Falconer is the Managing Director of Volatus Drones, a company that's been playing a crucial role in helping government agencies and commercial operators find the right drone solution for a wide range of missions. Sean brings a ton of experience, not only in distributing some of the most widely used platforms, but also in understanding how those platforms fit into real-world operations. I'm really looking forward to hearing his take on where the market is heading and what buyers need to know when making a UAS purchasing decision. So Sean, with that, welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. No, thank you for being on. Sean, so there's really kind of two themes of this show. I want to talk about, what people need to know when buying a UAS purchase, specifically some of the specs and all that kind of stuff. And I also want to kind of talk about, what are some non-Chinese options that are out there that they should be aware of. But before we go there, I kind of always want to start the show by kind of introducing the guests and kind of getting a flavor for what their background is. So can you kind of tell us a little about yourself? Where did you grow up? How did you get in the drone space? I mentioned that you're with Volatus now, but you used to own Empire Drones. So can you kind of talk us through a little bit about, who you are and how you're in this space?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm from Syracuse, New York, born and raised. Grew up here, went to college nearby, and then ended up going to Syracuse University to get my master's of architecture. I did architecture for about 5 years. I was a licensed architect, but at the same time, I'd also started my own drone as service provider business on the side. And then that slowly grew into hardware sales. And at that time, that's when Empire Drone was formed. And about 5 years after the formation of Empire Drone, it was acquired by Volatus Aerospace in 2023. And Empire Drone was rebranded as Volatus Drones. So that's where we are today. So I got into it through the world of architecture. We'd go out to these buildings, and I knew there was a better way to record the buildings and take measurements and all that. So we started getting into photogrammetry very early on, in like 2014, 2015, new ways to document the site. And that just slowly morphed into its own little side business. And yeah, here we are today.
Wow. So I didn't know that about you, but our paths had a similar theme. I got into drones as a general contractor, so kind of the same industry.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
The same thought too. Is like, man, there's got to be a better way of doing this, and photogrammetry. And so I did a little bit of a stint through academia.
Mhm.
And when I say that, I'm still there, but same kind of thing. So that's cool. That's cool to know about you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now let's dive into really the meat of our discussion here. And again, it's kind of a two-part thing. First part, kind of talking about sensors and really. And I'll frame it this way before we get into the discussion about what are the real alternatives that are out there. But let me frame it to you this way. Let's just say I'm a commercial drone pilot. I'm looking for a non-DJI, non-Autel drone, and I've got some kind of alternative drone in mind. And I've got their spec sheet open, and I want to do kind of an apples to apples comparison. And I know DJI or I know Autel. So let's start off this way. What do I need to know about the drone in terms of sensors and anything else about the drone? What should I be looking at? What is good? What is bad? What is acceptable? What's not acceptable? So what should I look at the spec sheet when I'm looking for a non-Chinese drone?
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely becomes more complicated, right? Whereas in the past 10 years or so, the easy option was DJI. It's off the shelf.
Right.
It works. It's easy to understand. Upgrading from one system to another is pretty self-explanatory, where you know what you're going to get.
Right.
So when you start migrating away from these off-the-shelf systems, it becomes a little more complex, and you have to be a bit better about reading the specs. I will say that if you are migrating away from DJI or want a Chinese alternative, it is sort of nice in a way because it does open a whole new world of options and sensors. Whereas with some of the Chinese manufacturers, you're sort of pigeonholed into their ecosystem, right? Like only certain cameras work with certain drones, and only certain accessories work with certain drones and software and whatnot.
Right.
Whereas when you start getting into the other options, like I said, it opens up a whole other world of payloads and accessories and stuff of that nature.
Right.
And it really depends on the manufacturer, right? So it's difficult to say like you should be looking for this specific camera, this specific thermal imager. We were speaking earlier about thermal imagers where, the DJI thermal imagers are proprietary, whereas many of the, US or NDA compliant systems are FLIR based.
Right.
So you are given those FLIR tools that you can use with these other systems, where again you're kind of breaking out of that ecosystem.
Yeah, no, and that's a challenge with the DJI thermal imagers is if you want to tune those images, you have to use the DJI thermal analysis tool, and it's okay, and it does have the benefit of being free, but FLIR's got a lot of other tools that are a lot more expansive.
Yeah, exactly. And one other thing I'll say is, speaking about payloads and imagers and stuff, many times when you're stepping away from these Chinese, I'll call them turnkey, out of the box solutions, you're depending on your mission, you end up working with multiple manufacturers, right? So one manufacturer will build the drone platform, the other manufacturer will build the gimbal, and then the other manufacturer will build the camera that that sits in the gimbal, right? So immediately you think off the bat like something like the Inspired Flight IF800 with a Grimsey gimbal, and something like a Workswell camera to go in that gimbal. So it's really important to understand the specs of everything you're putting into that platform, and then not to toot my own horn, but work with people who know how to get all these systems to go together properly.
Right.
Again, that's only when you're getting into the more complex systems. There are good out of the box options as well that are non-Chinese.
Yeah. And I definitely want to talk about those, but let me kind of narrow it a little bit, maybe talk about one of the most common use cases, just like photogrammetry, right? Yeah. So mapping of some sort. So, and again, your point is well taken that when you get some of these more complex systems, they're going to have different sensors on them, multispectral, thermal, and others, LiDAR, whatever. But I mean, I don't have the data in front of me, but photogrammetry is like the number one, right? Yeah. I mean, it's a very high percentage, and that's what the use cases are. And then photogrammetry, so we're talking about a camera. That's the primary sensor there. So when I look at a spec, I look at like sensor size and things like megapixels and things like that. Can you speak to like what's a good mapping drone? What are some of those specs? And are there some other things that we need to look at on the spec sheet if like photogrammetry is my aim?
Yeah, sure. So there are quite a few photogrammetry alternatives out there. There's quite a few options. And it all depends on your budget. So right off the bat, I'm thinking of the ACSL Soten, which is a Japanese-made NDA compliant drone. It's similar size. I would say it's slightly smaller than an M30, a little bigger than like a Mavic 3, and that camera has a 20 megapixel camera, 1-inch CMOS sensor with a mechanical shutter. So right off the bat, this thing can go out and map day one, right? And it's got a very similar setup to the DJI environment, which makes it really nice.
Yeah.
If you need something that can cover more space more quickly, and you're doing like big projects,
right,
you might want to look into something like the Wingtra Gen 2,
right?
Because it's
a fixed wing.
Yeah, it's a fixed wing. It thing's really cool. I've seen it fly quite a few times, and it has swappable sensors.
Mm-hmm.
Right off the bat, I'm thinking of the Sony sensor that has a 42 megapixel camera, 60-minute flight time. So you're able to just launch this thing and it goes out and maps huge swaths of area and take those images and bring it back into your photogrammetry. The nice thing about Wingtra is, they started off as a hardware company, right? Just focusing on making the drone and integrating the cameras. But now now it's a solution, right? Like they've set it up where you have the drone, you have the base station, and then you have the post-processing all in one flow.
Right.
So people who are used to doing that type of stuff with DJI, there's alternatives out there.
And again, one of the Wingtra is a really cool company, and they've got some cool stuff. As we just said, it's a fixed wing, which it is different than a multi-rotor, right? It's not going to hover, although it does have I would encourage those who are listening to this to kind of check out a YouTube video on them. They do have a vertical launch, so it's kind of this cool scenario where they can take off and land vertically, but they've got because they're fixed wing, they got a much larger radius that they can fly and stay aloft for a long time. But so I heard a couple of things of what you said here, and you tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth though. But if I'm someone who's looking to get into, commercial grade photogrammetry, would you say that like the minimum, you can always get better, right? But the minimum of what is acceptable now would be something like a 1-inch sensor, 20 megapixels with a mechanical shutter. Would you say those are like the three big things that if you had, someone would look at you as if you had inferior equipment?
I think that's right on the mark. Yep. 20 megapixel, 1-inch sensor with the mechanical shutter. Mechanical shutter, that's key. So as soon as they see that, they'll be like, okay, this, they know what they're doing.
Right. Gotcha. So let me switch gears a little bit too on the thermal imager side. Is there something that, is there a specific number or a specification that again, it's all means something on the spec sheet, but is there something that really draws your eye that you look for?
Well, it's that gold standard now for resolution on the thermal sensors, 640 by 512, right?
Right.
That's what everyone's used to. Anything below that, people kind of just poo-poo. But we're lucky because there's options out there when it comes to that image, that sensor size. And then there's also sensors that have even higher resolution that are available out there. But then again, you're talking some serious money there. Again, the Soten that has a swappable payload, so you can you could throw a 640 by 512 FLIR sensor on there. Pretty much all the platforms out there that are NDA compliant have some flavor of 640 by 512 sensor that you can put on there, whether it be a third-party manufacturer or it's built by the platform manufacturer themselves.
Gotcha. Makes sense. That makes sense. And I think that's an important thing that you've said multiple times throughout this conversation is that, with DJI, for the most part, the sensors are either integrated with the drone and you can't take them out. That is what it is. Again, some of the enterprise models, you can interchange their own different sensors in there, but a lot of the other ones have a much larger and more open ecosystem, so you can swap that out. I think that's an important thing to kind of double click on.
Yeah, you'd be hard pressed to find a system out there that's not swappable once you start stepping out of the box solutions.
Got it. So talk to me about water resistance, and this is particularly important to like first responders. who bad guys do bad things in bad weather, just like anything else. Or, not necessarily bad guys, but if they're trying to do search and rescue or, there's public safety type stuff, flying, when there's precipitation around is a thing. Is that very common? Or do most drones, can they fly in some amount of rain? Is that, DJI is kind of, depends on what you get. Some can, some can't. So what is your thoughts there?
Yeah. So most of the, I'd say, US made or NDA compliant systems do have some level of IP rating, which is a pleasant surprise once you start looking at options other than DJI. You'd be hard pressed to find one that doesn't have some sort of water resistance. And, that goes all the way down from, we work with a company called UAV Tech, and they have a little small one that's like a tactical drone, kind of the size of like a DJI Mini.
Okay.
That's water resistant all the way up to some of the large fixed wings that have that water resistance built in. Yeah, because a lot of these platforms are trying to answer the call of a lot of different industries at once, and
right.
That's one of the common denominators is we need some sort of IP rating.
What about like subscriptions? Like there's the hardware, and then is that something that I should be looking at for a manufacturer? That like, okay, if I buy this drone, is it a one-time cost? Or is it a one-time cost plus an annual fee to unlock all of the features? Is that very common? Is that something I should be looking at?
Not with any of the companies I work with, unless you're getting into some of the heavier mapping solutions like LiDAR, post-processing. That's when you'll start needing a subscription. But to fly the drone itself, no. It's you open it up and go. There's no sort of hardware lock on them.
Okay. Yeah, I know Skydio has some of that. I'm not intimately familiar with what all of their features that come by default and what are.
I've heard about this quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I gotcha. Yeah. I gotcha. And then like flight performance. All right. So again, let's take fixed wing off the table for now, because that's just a different animal from the multi-rotor. But and I guess this might depend on the size and whatnot, but what are some, what's acceptable in terms of like flight time and range? If there's different things about stability, that kind of stuff, what should I be looking at for that?
Yeah, the flight time on some of these systems, it's actually kind of eye-popping what we're getting out of a few of these. Just an example, like ideaForge Nitra. This is a Indian-made drone, again, NDA compliant. It's about the size of an M350, and it can fly for over 90 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. So this thing, we've done some flight testing with it, and it flies longer than what's specified. It was, just almost touching 2 hours on its battery too, it's wild.
And this is a multi-rotor?
Multi-rotor, yeah. It's quadcopter with a 15-kilometer range. So, yeah, again, another option, another system that, has, again, that eye-popping capability, like the Ascent Spirit, right? 45-minute flight time with 20-kilometer range. Again, you're right up there with some of the other DJI Enterprise aircraft.
Yeah.
So, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, if you were looking at something other than DJI, the specs were a little scary, right? Like you never knew if you were actually going to get decent battery time. You never knew what kind of range you would actually receive once you were, in an urban environment and whatnot. I think that put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, but we're past that. A lot of these systems are really, really quite impressive when it comes to what they're doing.
How about like warranty and maintenance? Is it kind of a standard warranty across the board? Maybe like a 1-year warranty that comes out of the box, or is that change, or is that different? Something I should kind of be mindful of. And then maintenance. There's a standard maintenance where, you only want to get so many battery cycles or cycles out of your batteries and swap out propellers and firmware and that kind of stuff. But anything that I should be looking at that's maybe different type of maintenance that I might not be familiar with?
I would say maintenance is pretty standard, exactly what you were just mentioning. In terms of warranty, a lot of them are, that 1-year warranty. There are a few manufacturers like Inspired Flight, they have Inspired Care, which is similar to DJI Care, where they'll take care of you pretty quick if there's any issues. I will say that what is nice about working with some of these domestic manufacturers is that they are trying very hard to win over customers. and build their user base. So
Mm-hmm.
they'll bend over backwards to make things right and support their customers, right? Like perfect
Yeah.
example, Inspired Flight, ACSL. We're talking with them all the time, and I'm not talking about like we're talking with like a call center. No, we're like talking with the people who are actually on the floor putting these things together and fixing them and whatnot. So it's
Got
nice to
it.
get that level of support.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, let me kind of switch gears now and kind of get to the second part. I mean, so the first part of this was just kind of talking about sensors and what, industry standard is and things that you should be looking for if you're looking at the spec sheet of a DJI alternative. But now let's kind of go and talk about like what are the go-to ones that are out there. And again, Volatus Drones is a hardware supplier, so you're in the thick of this.
Yeah.
And I'm one of the reasons I invited you is because you sell drones. So people come to you and you sell multiple platforms. So you're in a great position to be able to say, for this use case, we sell a lot of drones in this space, and for this use case, we use this type of drone. To kind of organize it though, and I was trying to, kind of before we came on, I was trying to think about the best way to organize it, and kind of, because DJI is such a familiar name, I think I want to kind of organize this discussion around maybe four groupings, like the DJI, mini class, the Mavic class, the Matrice class, and then the Matrice 3 or the Matrice 30 class, and then the Matrice 350 class, or M30 class, Matrice 350 class, kind of going from small to large. So, I guess kind of with that as a framework, what are the go-to drones out there? What are you selling a lot of? What are consumers gravitating to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just point out, like you said, we are manufacturer agnostic, so we work with a ton of different manufacturers, and so
Right.
there's a lot of options out there. Some of which I probably forgot to even I'll forget to even bring up. But so
Well, we can always put more in the show notes, so
yes,
no worries there. But yeah, no, just what are the ones that you're seeing a lot of people that are just the kind of the go-tos?
yeah. So for the mini class, sort of that tactical drone. So that mini class, sort of that tactical drone, kind of like that FPV setup.
Yeah.
You're talking about like the Vata 2 or the Mini 4, stuff like that. A lot of our customers, we've been introducing them to a company from the UK called UAV Tech.
Okay.
They make a variety of drone platforms. The one I'm referring to right now is the Bug, which is, a small,
Okay.
almost like FPV type setup with 25-minute flight time. It's very similar to what anyone who's done like tactical entry, what they're used to. And just sidebar, cool thing about UAV Tech is they've done a lot of work in Ukraine. So a lot of these
Oh,
platforms, from the Bug up to their fixed wing stuff, are battle tested.
literally battle
Yeah, and
tested.
some of them don't come back
Right.
one way.
Do you? I mean, and again, I promise I won't be like quizzing you on the specs as you call them out.
Yeah.
But if you happen to know, do you know what the? I'm assuming that has just a regular RGB camera. Do you know what the specs on that? How many megapixels, that sort of thing?
I don't. I know it has the EO sensor and it does have the ability to put thermal on there as well.
Oh, okay.
So again,
Okay.
this is probably geared more towards public safety, defense type folks. If you don't
Okay.
need something that wild, and you do need some sort of small setup, I look into building your own FPV, right? Like
Okay.
there's kits out there. The options when you get into that small size from a manufacturer are few and far between. If budget is an issue or, you're just looking to start out, like take a look at,
Okay.
building your own FPV. There's kits out there. I've never done it, but I know a lot of people who have, and you'll learn a lot about drones and have a piece of hardware you're proud about. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Any other in the DJI Mini, class that you want to kind of highlight, or you want to move on to the Mavics?
I can't think of any other thing that's small. I'd say let's move on to
Okay.
the Mavics. Yeah.
Okay. So Mavic size, Mavic, Autel Evo size, quadcopter. I don't know. Now I'm making up statistics, but about 2 pounds or so, something like that. So what in that class is out there that you're selling a lot of?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the Mavic size platforms, I know we're talking about DJI alternatives, and sort of falls in that same area, Autel.
Hmm.
If you can't get a Mavic size drone, I would still consider Autel. A lot of their stuff is now being produced in Vietnam, So
Okay.
still a Chinese company, still might get banned within the next year or so. That's up in the air.
Yeah, Altel is still specifically called out in
In the
the
NDA,
Defense
yeah.
Reauthorization Act. So,
Yeah.
I hear you. I have several Altels, and I bought, several of those thinking that was going to be,
Safe.
a more palatable option. But it's when I saw it branded there in the Defense Reauthorization Act, I was like, oh man.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, I take your point.
Yeah. Yeah. So if budget's an issue and you need a system that just works right out of the box and you're not super worried about it being banned in the next year or so, keep an eye on the Evo 2 series. They have the thermal imaging option, the whole 9 yards.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't want to deal with, bands and all that when it comes to the Mavic size, I'd say take a look at the ACSL Soten. I mentioned that earlier. It's made in Japan, NDA compliant. It's actually ACSL is actually a manufacturing partnership between a bunch of Japanese manufacturers, Yamaha, Sony, and I forget the other one, but originally formed in Japan. Anyway, a little bigger than a Mavic, has the option for interchangeable payloads. You have it comes with the mapping camera, 20 megapixel, 1-inch CMOS with mechanical shutter. Can swap it out for a thermal imager. They even have a multispectral option.
Okay.
IP rated. So, something like that, you're looking at just starting out, it's around 12,000. And then, depending on what kind of controller you get and, what kind of bundle you get with batteries and the thermal sensor, it just goes up from there.
I gotcha. Now, does it have, I'm assuming it has like whatever the flight app that it uses, you can program it for certain overlaps and, a camera angle and all that kind of stuff for photogrammetry?
Yeah, that's what's nice about the Soten. I've flown it multiple times, and I was pleasantly surprised with how clean the operating system was and the user interface. It's very similar to DJI in those terms, where you have, your plan and map area, and then you have your, manual free flight area, and it's all very well laid out and easy to understand. Again, pleasantly surprised with that. So use case for the Soten mapping inspections, and then, even public safety when you get into that thermal imager and whatnot.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Any other go-tos in the Mavic size that you would recommend?
Yeah, so there are other options out there. Again, I go back to UAV Tech. They have a number of different size drones like the Horus and whatnot. But again, those are definitely more focused towards like public safety and defense applications. A little more expensive. Yeah.
Now, when you say they're more focused for that, is that just because they're more rugged? They don't have as high a quality a camera, or what makes you say they're kind of more focused for public safety?
Yeah, it's definitely, how do I put this? If you're interested in mapping and inspections, it's not gonna work very well for that. This is more for like Overwatch, even like high speed chase, stuff like that, search and rescue. I don't believe, other than the fixed wings, I don't believe it has like built-in mapping features when you're at the Mavic size drones. So yeah.
Okay. Well, so then let's move to the next class, which I'm calling the M30. So for those of you who may or may not be familiar with it, it's a heavier aircraft, enterprise level. Now I'm kind of guessing the spec time, but at least a half hour of flight. So anyways, so of that class, so the Matrice or the M30 class, what are some good alternatives to the M30?
Yeah, so I would say once we start looking at the alternatives on the M30, it kind of straddles the Matrice 350, class. But I would say, we spoke about this earlier, but a great setup for the M30 target audience, which is mostly public safety and inspections. It's the ideaForge Nitra.
Yeah.
That's that drone that's made in India, NDA compliant.
Okay.
It has that's the one we're talking about. It has a 90-minute flight time.
Yeah.
IP54 rating. You can swap sensors. It's I would say it's more similar to an M350 in that regard, except that I kind of call the M350 the Swiss Army knife of drones, right? Like it can do everything whereas the
Right.
M30 is more targeted towards, specific use cases. The ideaForge
Right.
Nitra can do a lot, but it can't do everything. So that's why I'm saying it's more of the Matrice 30 class of drone.
Now, I know you said you can put different sensors on there. So I'm assuming that one of the options that you can put on there is a high quality RGB camera for mapping. And if that's true, which I assume it is there software and the flight app that you can do the same question to be able to, create your waypoint assisted missions and
Yeah,
adjust your camera and angles, all that kind of
I
stuff?
don't believe the Nitra has, I'd have to check, but I don't believe they have the actual like mapping type mechanics built in.
Okay.
Again, this one's more for, I'd say, public safety, search and rescue. Again, I have to check on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to look.
Okay. Okay. That's fine.
Yeah. Oh, it's more search and rescue, tactical operations, stuff like that.
So, and one of the nice things, and I think, one of the reasons that I think you would agree that the M30 is a good for law enforcement and inspections is because it's got an optical zoom.
Mm-hmm.
It's phenomenal. I want to say it's 20 times or more optical zoom, and it's really impressive. You can have this thing, hundreds of yards away
Yeah,
and be
it's
able
awesome.
to zoom in, and yeah, it's really pretty impressive. Now, mapping, not so much,
Mm-hmm.
but anyways. So is that one of the reasons that you're saying that these other options are good inspection drones and not necessarily for mapping drones, just because of the zoom capability?
Correct. Yeah. So the Nitra has that 30 times zoom EOIR, set up with the imaging sensor. But just like the Matrice 30, I wouldn't say it's necessarily set up for mapping. Another drone.
Well, before we move past
Yeah.
that one, do you know what the ballpark price tag for that is?
Yeah. So you're looking around $60,000.
60.
Yeah.
Man, they get expensive fast,
Oh
don't
yeah.
they?
Hold on tight.
The M30, it's been a while since I bought mine, but I want to say what, 8 or 10? Is that what they go for now?
That's what they were going for before the tariffs hit.
Right,
Yeah. I
right.
think the M30 is just south of $20,000 now. I'd have to check, but yeah,
Okay.
the tariffs really
Yeah,
jacked up
yeah.
the price of DJI.
Right. Okay. But even at the tariffed price of 20,000, that's a third of what the alternative
Yes,
is.
it is.
So okay, it's definitely going to. A ban and tariffs just have a significant a ban for certain, but then tariff too. They just have such a significant impact on hardware. It's really it's remarkable.
Yeah.
Okay, so but I interrupted you. So was there another drone that you want to talk about in the M30 class,
Yeah,
or do you want to
absolutely.
move to the?
So,
Okay, go ahead.
in that M30 class, another option is the Ascent Spirit.
Okay.
I'm sure you've seen this drone. It looks like a tube, right? It's the coaxial
Yeah.
drone with the two sets of props that rotate in different directions.
Yep.
It's a pretty sweet setup. Ascent was actually recently acquired by Robinson Aircraft. So since then, I've known that they've come a long way, and they're actually
Okay.
they recently announced the Helios, which is a small coaxial drone that will be competitive. If we think back towards the other classes, that'll be competitive in the
Mhm.
mini class. So I'm excited for that one to
Okay.
come out. But anyway, the Spirit, again, it's
Well, my two questions with all this is going to be how's the sensor, and then what's the price tag?
yeah. So for the Spirit sensor, you can mount third-party sensors on there.
Okay.
Again, this is more in the M30 class, so it's not going to be really for mapping, but
Okay.
you can bank on a 20 megapixel camera with zoom, IR, and then the
Okay.
price. Let's say it starts around 25,000 and goes up
Okay.
from there with adding different payloads and whatnot.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the M30 class.
Okay. Okay. So let's move on to the Matrice 350, which again, that's as you said, is the Swiss Army knife. I mean, it's kind of their DJI's workhorse. Put different sensors underneath it, so it's a little bit of its own beast. But what are the options that are out there for Matrice 350 alternative?
Yeah, so those systems that are in that Matrice 350 class, kind of that Swiss Army knife, jack of all trades type drone, it's your big industrial quadcopter. Right off the bat, you have to think about inspired flight. They've been in the game
Okay.
for a while. They have the IF 800, which is it looks very similar to an M350. They have the IF800, and then they have the much larger
Okay.
IF1200. IF800 is more in the vein of the M350, where it's holding those EO/IR payloads similar to an M350, maybe some small LiDAR systems. So it has that
Okay.
interchangeable aspect where it's holding third-party payloads.
So what does that run?
Yeah, so the inspired flight, you're looking at starting around 25 up to 40.
Okay.
Really depends on which sort of setup you want. With all of these systems, there's some
Customization, yeah, sure. And what sensors you put on it?
with sensors and even the controllers. So 25 to 40, maybe 50, 60, depending on what you're doing.
Okay.
And the IF1200, which is again bigger than the IF800, larger than the Tariffs 350. That's really for holding heavy LiDAR systems, bathymetric
Gotcha.
systems, really these large payloads. And again, you're starting 25, but once you start adding payloads, especially with some of these LiDAR payloads, you could be in hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. That one's a tough one to really compare when you're talking about LiDAR, because as you said, that could be 100 or 150 or $175,000 just for the sensor. So, but the platform is around 25,000. You're saying
Exactly. Yeah. So it's important to remember that when rather than when you're buying DJI, you're more buying a platform to put payloads on once you get into these systems. Another example is
right.
Free fly systems like the the Alta X, the Astro. These are platforms that are similar size to the Tariffs 350, where you would then go plug in payloads.
I've heard a lot about the Astro. Can you kind of talk through that one a little bit, and price tag and pros and cons of that one?
Honestly, I can't, because we just signed the dealer agreement, so I'm not totally up to speed on the specs and everything.
Okay. Yeah, I have heard a lot about that one though, so I would suspect that might be a popular one for your customers.
Absolutely. And then again, so the inspired flight, free fly, they can do mapping, but once you start getting into these larger systems, it might make more sense to look at specific mapping drones. For example, like we talked about earlier, the Nitra, which is starting around 25, 35,000, which is specifically built for mapping. And then if you need something that is more public safety oriented, thinking like Overwatch, long flight time, you're in public safety, sort of like more than a quadcopter, but less than a helicopter, would be something like the ideaForge Switch.
Okay.
Over 2-hour flight time. Again, it's really for Overwatch. You're able to just put this fixed wing up and fly around in circles and keep an eye on things.
Right.
You're looking at 80,000 plus for something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Are there any other that maybe fit through the cracks, or any other of the models that you want to bring to our attention for us to Google afterwards to learn more about?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now. No.
Okay. Well, you certainly give us a lot to think through. Once we get the defibrillator paddles back, and get our heartbeat to heart back after hearing some of the price tags on some of them, but that's just the reality of the scenarios that we're in right now. So I appreciate that real, honest, and good information. I got one final question I was going to ask you as we kind of wrap things up here. But I mean, obviously, buying a new drone, especially if you're an entrepreneur, that is a sizable and significant investment in capital. If someone were to ask you, what advice would you give startup entrepreneur about their first commercial drone purchase, what is something that you might tell them?
I would definitely say don't rush into it. Take it slow. Do your research, especially with some of these DJI alternative drones. Seeing is believing for sure. It's easy to buy a DJI drone just off the internet because it works and there's a ton of slick marketing material and whatnot. But before you go spend tens of thousands of dollars on a system, get an in-person demo, fly it around yourself. Yeah. There's plenty of dealers across the country. I'd be more than happy to, us included, to work with you and show you the systems before you pull the trigger on it. But it's we're kind of in that stage that we were in 10 years ago, where Before you buy a drone, you really have to research it.
Yeah.
DJI has made it so easy the last 10 years just to,
Yeah.
I'm going to upgrade to DJI, press click, let's go, okay, here we go. So
Right.
you need to do that research before you hop into a system. Make sure it's the right for what you want to do.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, that was one of the big things is that DJI was kind of, out of the box, ready to go. They had sold a ton of them. So, they was pretty standardized, and you can go to the internet and get reviews, and they had sold enough of them and been around a lot long enough where that you could just get reviews, and you can get other people and their experience and have a sense of confidence in what you were getting. We are not, if that goes away, it'll be a while before we get that from another manufacturer. And as you said, we're back to the point where we were 10 years ago, where you got to do homework, you gotta communicate with somebody. The world got smaller, where you're going to have to talk with the dealer, who might be the manufacturer, who might be the person that's walking the floor, of the plant that's building these. So it's important to kind of know who that is. And as you said, when you're buying something that's $10, $20, $30, $50,000, this is a car plus, and you have every right to go to talk to a dealer and say, look, you wouldn't buy a car for $40,000 without driving it. You shouldn't buy the drone, that much with those costs either, without, flying it and getting a sense of comfort for it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, just talk to us, give us a call, shoot us an email. I mean, we have done the research. We sort of saw the writing on the wall a few years ago when it comes to DJI and, Chinese drones. So we've been putting in a lot of hard work to build a portfolio of non-Chinese options for our customers. So, and I know a lot of other people have, so just had that conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Sean. And we're going to leave it there with that. And we're going to have Sean's contact information in the show notes. So if there was a model that was of interest to you that Sean talked about, and you want to get more information, you can reach out to him directly or one of his colleagues over at Volatus Drones, and they'll get you in good hands. So Sean, thank you so much for carving out some time. It was great having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, good deal. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next episode. So hang in there, and I look forward to it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Clemson Drone Podcast. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Learn more about our online training offerings by going to clemsondrone.com. Thanks again, and remember, at Clemson Drone, the sky's not the limit, it's just the beginning. Thank you for listening to the Clemson Drone Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star rating and write a review. I'm told this makes a big difference in the algorithms used to recommend the podcast to others. Thank you.